Unusual activity has been detected from your device. Try again later. 5 EBEC2A0693443E933BA446B439422C. Re-intenter. At first, this sounds like the FIA doing exactly what people expect the FIA to do. Monaco is narrow. The new cars are faster. The tunnel exit looked too dangerous. So the governing body stepped in before the weekend became a risk nobody could defend. That is the clean version. But the drivers are not reacting to the clean version. They are reacting to what this rule says underneath. Because Formula 1 drivers are not scared of speed. Speed is their world. Speed is the thing they understand better than almost anyone alive. They do not climb into these cars expecting comfort, and they do not need the sport to become soft. But they do need the car to feel natural. They need the throttle to answer in a way their hands and feet can trust. They need the power to arrive when instinct says it should arrive. They need the machine to behave like a racing car, not like a car being constantly corrected by invisible limits. And this is why the Monaco engine mode has created so much tension. The FIA is forcing every team into REV1, a special engine map that makes the electric power begin fading at just 200 km per hour. That number is the beginning of the problem. For a normal person, 200 km per hour sounds extreme. It sounds like a speed where any limit would make sense. But in Formula 1, 200 km per hour is not the end of the acceleration phase. It is often the middle of it. The car is still pulling. The driver is still building speed. The lap time is still being created. And now, at Monaco, that electric push starts to disappear much earlier than it normally would. Not because the driver chose to manage it. Not because the team chose a different strategy. Because the FIA has forced it. That is what makes the drivers uneasy. The car can still be fast, but it is no longer fast in the same way. And at Monaco, that difference matters more than almost anywhere else on Earth. Because Monaco is not a track where a driver has time to negotiate with the car. There is no wide runoff area where a mistake becomes a warning. There is no long escape road where the driver can reset and try again on the next lap. At Monaco, the wall is the correction. That is why trust becomes everything. If the driver knows exactly how the car will respond, they can attack. They can place the front tire inches from the barrier. They can commit through casino. They can breathe through the tunnel. They can pick up the throttle at Portier and believe the rear will stay behind them. But if the car's power delivery feels even slightly different, the brain notices. A tiny hesitation appears. A slight lift. A softer throttle input. A fraction less commitment near the wall. And at Monaco, fractions become positions. That is where the revolt begins. Not with drivers refusing to race. Not with chaos in the paddock. But with the feeling that Formula 1 is moving toward cars that need to be managed too much by regulation, especially when the most famous street circuit on the calendar cannot safely accept their full performance. That is the deeper issue. The new Formula 1 era was supposed to be smarter. More electric power. More advanced systems. More energy management. More technology shaping the battle between teams and drivers. But now, before Monaco, the FIA is forced to say, not all of it can be used here. The electric power must fade earlier. The override button loses its bite. Active aerodynamics are banned completely. And suddenly, the future of Formula 1 is being told to stand down in the place where the sport's history is loudest. That contradiction is impossible for the drivers to ignore. Max Verstappen's criticism now sounds less like a complaint and more like a warning. He has called the new engine direction anti-racing, and Monaco gives that argument a sharp edge. Because when a car needs a special mode just to keep its speed inside a safer window, drivers start asking whether the technical direction has gone too far away from the feeling of pure racing. Lando Norris has also questioned the state of Formula 1, and this weekend gives that concern another layer. Because the issue is not only safety. Everyone understands safety. No driver wants to blast out of the tunnel at a speed the circuit cannot reasonably handle. No team wants a car arriving too fast into a section with no space to recover. No fan wants Monaco to become reckless just because the technology has become more powerful. But drivers can accept a safety decision and still dislike what it reveals. And what this reveals is uncomfortable. The cars are so advanced, so powerful, and so dependent on complex systems that one of the sport's most iconic circuits now needs a special rule package to keep them under control. That does not feel like a small adjustment. It feels like a warning sign. And the FIA's own data explains why it acted. The new cars were predicted to leave the Monaco tunnel at more than 310 km per hour if the active aerodynamic straightline mode was allowed. That is a terrifying number for that part of the lap. The driver exits darkness. The braking zone arrives instantly. The barriers sit close. The margin is tiny. If the car is unstable, if the tires are not ready, if the driver needs one more moment than the circuit gives, the consequences can arrive before anyone has time to react. So the FIA's logic is clear. But clear logic does not remove the tension. Because Formula One drivers do not only judge a rule by why it exists. They judge it by what it does to the car. And Rev 1 changes the way the car feels at speed. On most circuits, the electric power begins to fade at around 290 km per hour. That gives the driver a longer, stronger push before the system starts reducing power. At Monaco, it begins fading at 200. That means the driver has to recalibrate instinct. Where they expect the car to keep pulling, it starts easing away. Where they might expect an extra deployment effect, the mandatory map says no. Where the override button might normally feel like a weapon, it becomes weaker, because the derating still begins at the same early point. That is the kind of change that sounds technical on paper, but feels personal in the cockpit. A driver knows when a car is answering fully. A driver knows when a tool has lost its bite. A driver knows when the lap requires more trust than the car has earned. And Monaco demands total trust before the driver can even think about being spectacular. That is why this first block of the story matters. The FIA is not just limiting top speed. It is changing the emotional relationship between driver and machine. A racing driver wants control. Not comfort. Control. They want the car to be dangerous in a way they understand. They want the limit to be sharp, but honest. They want the throttle, brakes, tires, and energy deployment to speak the same language every lap. When a mandatory engine mode rewrites part of that language, the driver has to translate at 200 km per hour, next to a wall. That is not a normal adjustment. That is a mental burden. And the burden spreads across the whole grid. Mercedes may lose part of an electric advantage it expected to use. Ferrari may see opportunity because Monaco becomes more about grip, balance, and confidence. McLaren may feel the gap compress. Red Bull may sense a door opening, even if its own car still needs stability. But every driver faces the same core problem. They must attack Monaco in a car that has been deliberately restrained. The car still has the technology. It still has the power. It still has the systems. But the FIA has decided that, here, those systems cannot be allowed to run freely. That is why the paddock tension feels different from a normal rule dispute. This is not only about who gains and who loses. It is about whether the drivers believe this new direction still gives them the kind of racing they want. Because if every historic circuit needs a special restriction, if every dangerous section needs a different energy map, if every advanced system has to be switched off when the margins get too small, then the sport has a bigger question to answer. Are the cars becoming better racing machines? Or are they becoming machines that need constant control to remain raceable? That is the question Monaco is forcing into the open. And the drivers are the ones who feel it first. Not the rule makers. Not the fans watching from a distance. Not the engineers reading clean numbers on a screen. The drivers. They are the ones who will take the car up the hill to Casino. They are the ones who will fire through the tunnel and trust the braking zone. They are the ones who will feel the power fade earlier than normal and decide, in a split second, whether they can still attack. That is why the so-called revolt is not just noise. It is the human side of a technical decision. The FIA can say the rule is necessary. The data can say the risk was real. The teams can adapt their maps and setups. But the drivers still have to believe the car beneath them. And at Monaco, belief is not optional. Without belief, there is no perfect lap. Without a perfect lap, there may be no track position. Without track position, the race can be lost before Sunday even has a chance to begin. That is why this engine mode has become the first major pressure point of the Monaco weekend. It begins as a safety measure. It becomes a racing argument. And then it turns into something even bigger. A test of whether Formula One's new era still feels like Formula One to the people brave enough to drive it. But the engine mode is only one side of the argument. Because the moment the FIA forced Rev 1 onto Monaco, it also exposed the second restriction that made drivers even more uncomfortable. Active aerodynamics would not be used. Not limited. Not adjusted. Not allowed for the weekend. And that changes the story from a simple engine debate into a full confrontation between the drivers, the FIA, and the direction of the sport. Because active aerodynamics was supposed to be one of the great promises of the new era. It was meant to make the cars smarter, more efficient, and more adaptable. The idea was simple enough for anyone to understand. In corners, the car needs grip. On straights, the car needs less drag. So the wings could change behavior, helping the car feel planted when it turns, and quicker when it runs in a straight line. It sounded clever. It sounded modern. It sounded like Formula One pushing forward. But then Monaco arrived, and suddenly one of the most advanced tools on the car was judged too risky for the most famous street circuit in the world. That is the contradiction drivers cannot ignore. The sport built a future-facing system, then reached the calendar's most historic race and said, actually, not here. Not in qualifying. Not in the race. Not even on the short main straight. No straight line mode. No active wing behavior. No aerodynamic escape route. The cars would run fixed, loaded with downforce, and stripped of one of the headline features that was supposed to define them. And if the drivers were already frustrated by the early power fade, this made the question even sharper. Are they racing the new generation of Formula One, or a restricted version of it? That is why the tension grows. Because one restriction can be defended as a safety adjustment. Two restrictions begin to look like a pattern. First, the electric power starts fading at 200 km per hour. Then, the active aerodynamic system is removed entirely. Then, the override button loses its impact because the mandatory map still forces the same early derating point. Each piece has a reason. Each piece can be explained. But together, they create a feeling that the cars have become too powerful, too complex, or too dependent on systems that cannot always be trusted at the circuits that built the sport's identity. That is where the driver's frustration becomes more than emotion. It becomes a real sporting question. If the FIA has to take away electric performance, take away active aero, and reshape the car before Monaco can be run safely, then what exactly is the driver being asked to race? A pure Formula One car? Or a managed version of a Formula One car? That distinction matters. Because drivers want speed, but they also want directness. They want the car to feel alive, not filtered. They want tools that help them fight, not tools that disappear when the circuit gets difficult. And Monaco is the worst place for disappearing tools. Because everything here depends on confidence. A driver cannot approach Monaco like a normal circuit. They cannot slowly build a mistake and escape it. They cannot run wide, collect themselves, and continue as if nothing happened. The circuit demands total commitment before it gives any reward. That is why losing active aero matters so much. At another track, a driver may adapt around it more easily. There might be a long straight where energy deployment still helps. There might be a wide braking zone where a driver can set up an overtake. There might be a place where raw speed can rescue a compromised lap. Monaco offers almost none of that. So when active aero is removed, and electric power is softened early, the driver has fewer ways to recover time. The lap becomes old-fashioned in the most brutal way. Brake perfectly. Turn perfectly. Trust the front. Protect the rear. Get on throttle early. Avoid the wall. Do it again. And again. And again. That sounds pure, and in some ways it is. But there is a darker side. Because these cars were not designed to be purely old-fashioned machines. They were designed around a balance of advanced systems. Electric deployment, energy management, aerodynamic modes, and driver decisions all working together. Take away key parts of that balance, and teams have to rebuild the weekend quickly. The engineers must find a setup that keeps the car stable without active aero. The drivers must relearn how the car feels when the electric push fades much earlier. The strategists must understand whether track position becomes even more valuable, because the usual performance tools are weaker. And the teams must do all of this at the circuit where one blocked lap, one missed setup call, or one small hesitation can destroy the weekend. This is where the so-called revolt becomes visible. Not through shouting. Not through chaos. Through discomfort. Through the language drivers use when they talk about the direction of the rules. Through the tension between respecting safety and questioning whether Formula One has created a car that needs too much control. Max Verstappen's criticism stands in the middle of this. When he calls the engine concept anti-racing, he is not only talking about a number on a sheet. He is talking about the feeling of the car, the way the power is delivered, the way the race is shaped by systems instead of instinct. And Monaco gives that criticism a stage. Because here, the FIA is not asking drivers to manage power themselves. It is forcing a mode that decides when the electrical strength begins to fade. Here, the FIA is not allowing the aerodynamic system to operate under careful limits. It is banning it completely. Here, the FIA is not letting the most advanced version of the car face the most famous street circuit. It is creating a safer version, a controlled version, a version that fits inside Monaco's walls. That may be necessary. But necessary does not mean popular. And Lando Norris' wider concerns about the state of Formula One also fit into this moment. Because fans want racing they can feel. Drivers want cars they can attack. Teams want rules that reward performance without turning every circuit into a different technical compromise.